It was supposed to be routine. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had traveled halfway across the world for what her team called a standard diplomatic interview. A formal visit. A polite exchange. The kind of thing where everyone sticks to the script. Talks about regional security. Says thank you. And goes home. The cameras were set. The lights were cold and still. Producers whispered in earpieces. The stage was polished. Neutral. Everything about it felt safe. Professional. Predictable. And then President Ibrahim Traoré walked in. No entourage. No announcement. Just a quiet man in a modest suit. Walking softly like someone who didn't need a room to notice him. He offered Jasmine a gentle handshake and took the seat beside her. He didn't lean back. He didn't posture. He just sat. Straight and centered, like he knew who he was. Jasmine began with the usual warm-up questions. How is Burkina Faso managing regional partnerships? What's the outlook on development projects? How does the president balance diplomacy with domestic needs? He answered simply, calmly. Measured words. Careful tone. It was what everyone expected. Until she asked him something off script. How do you keep hope alive? She said, with everything you've seen. Everything this country has been through. He paused. The kind of pause that stretches just long enough to pull the room into stillness. Then he looked down, not at his notes, but at the floor. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes met hers, not as a president answering a question, but as a man who had lived too much to lie. And then he said, hope doesn't come from speeches. It comes from funerals. No one moved. Jasmine blinked. Caught completely off guard. The control room froze. No one was ready for that. What do you mean? She asked. Softly. Traoré leaned forward slightly. Hands folded. I've buried more friends than I've shaken hands with world leaders. No dramatics. No tears. Just honesty. That was the moment it all changed. The tone. The temperature. The entire energy of the room. This wasn't a political interview anymore. It was a confession. Jasmine tried to steady herself. Tried to stay composed. But her throat tightened, because in just 2 sentences, he had told her more about leadership than most people ever do behind podiums. He wasn't there to sell hope. He had lived through the cost of it. And suddenly, the set felt smaller. The conversation more personal. This wasn't about policy anymore. It was about pain. And the strange, stubborn kind of hope that rises not from promises, but from grief. She didn't know it yet. But this moment, this quiet, unscripted moment, would go on to move millions. Because for once, the world wasn't watching a politician speak. They were watching a human being, remember? The silence lingered long after his words. But Jasmine couldn't stop herself from leaning in. Something inside her told her this was no longer about politics. This was personal. So she asked gently, who have you lost? Traoré looked to the side. The camera catching his profile, the way his jaw tightened. The way his thumb began to nervously rub his knuckle. And then he said, my closest friend was named Malik. He didn't have to explain. The way he said his name, it was enough. The weight of memory was in his voice. We grew up together. Same village. Same school. He was the first to believe we could actually change something. Not by protesting or shouting, but by protecting what mattered. He paused. He died during an ambush. He was trying to shield a primary school from being overrun. They shot him in the leg first. He bled for almost 30 minutes. Jasmine covered her mouth. No ambulance came. Traoré continue. He kept calling for help over the radio. He still believed someone would come. And did someone come? Jasmine asked. Barely whispering. Traoré's voice dropped even lower. Only me. He looked away. His eyes locked on something far beyond the walls of the studio. And I came too late. The room was silent. No crew moved. No cue cards were lifted. It didn't matter anymore. That day, he said, was the day I stopped asking what I wanted to become. I knew. I joined the army because of Malik. Because someone had to carry on the fight he didn't finish. He shifted in his seat. But not to get comfortable. His body moved like a man who had grown used to carrying things that don't lighten with time. And now, he added quietly, I lead a country he never lived to see free. Jasmine sat there, holding back tears, realizing that every title, every responsibility, every speech, it all came back to a single man, bleeding alone next to a school. There were no policy points to argue, no numbers to cite, just a memory. And what struck her most wasn't the tragedy. It was the calm. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. The grief sat in the steadiness of his tone, in the way he never said hero or martyr, just Malik. That was the difference. He wasn't speaking to inspire. He was speaking because some pain demands to be spoken. Jasmine wiped her cheek and asked nothing more. She simply looked at him and nodded, because now she understood something most people never do. Some leaders don't rise from ambition. They rise from loss. And some revolutions don't begin with shouting. They begin with a radio still crackling in the hand of a man who never gave up right until his last breath. The interview had shifted, not just in tone, but in gravity. Jasmine could feel it in her chest, something heavy, something sacred. She didn't want to steer it back to policy. Not yet. So she asked softly, do you carry anyone with you? Anyone who walks with you? Even now, Traoré didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket. From it, he pulled out a small, worn, and creased photograph. Black and white, nearly torn. The edges curled from time. He held it in his hands like it was made of glass. This was us, he said. Before everything changed, he turned the photo toward her. 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl, standing barefoot in front of a small mud house, smiling like they didn't know the world owed them nothing. He pointed to the girl. My sister, Aminata. Jasmine looked up, already bracing. What happened to her? She asked gently. He took a breath. She died of malaria. She was 11. The words sat between them like stone. We had no money for medicine. He continued. No clinic nearby. My mother boiled leaves, said prayers. We did everything we could. But it wasn't enough. His thumb brushed the edge of the photo. I promised her, at her grave, that one day, no child in this country would die just because they were poor. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the photo back into his pocket. I've kept it with me ever since. Through every battle, every border, even in this office. Jasmine felt her own hands tighten in her lap. This wasn't about legacy. It was about a promise. A child-sized promise that had somehow become a national mission. And for a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the lights. Not the cameras. Not the world watching. Just a man with a photo in his pocket and a memory that never left his side. You carry her everywhere, she whispered. She carries me, he replied. There was a long pause, not for effect, but because some moments aren't meant to be filled with sound. This wasn't the kind of interview that ends with applause. It was the kind that lingers, the kind that follows you home. And in that moment, Jasmine realized something she would later struggle to explain to anyone back in Washington. This man was not leading from strategy or vision statements. He was leading from grief, from graves, from guilt, from love, a love so deep it refused to die, even when the person who inspired it did. She looked at the photo one last time in her mind. Already burned into memory, 2 boys, 1 girl, a cracked wall behind them, and a future they didn't know would vanish. This wasn't politics. It was a vow, and that's why, long after this interview would air, millions wouldn't remember the headlines. They'd remember the photo in his pocket and the little girl who changed the course of a president's life just by being his sister. By now, the cameras barely mattered. The studio lights were still on. But the real brightness came from the honesty between them. During a short break, Jasmine stepped outside the palace to get some air. The sun was just starting to set, casting long shadows across the marble steps. That's when she saw her, a little girl, maybe 8 years old, standing barefoot just beyond the palace gate. She held a small piece of cardboard with words written in faded black marker. "Can you give my mama a chance?" Jasmine stared. Something about the girl's posture, the way she held the sign with both hands like it was sacred, it stopped her cold. She turned to call for security when she heard a voice behind her. "She comes every Friday." It was Traoré. He had followed her out quietly. "What does she want?" Jasmine asked, eyes still on the child. "She thinks if the president sees her, her mother will get work." Jasmine turned, eyebrows raised. "Does it work?" Traoré nodded. "Sometimes. Her mother washes clothes. But lately, no one calls. No work. No money. No dignity. And you've spoken with them many times," he said softly. "I've bought them food, paid their rent. But her mother, she doesn't want help. She wants to earn." He stepped forward, walked slowly toward the gate, and knelt beside the girl. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her with both hands. She looked at it, hugged him tightly, and ran off smiling into the dusk. Jasmine walked over, stunned. "What was that?" "A job contract," he said. "Laundry position at the presidential residence. Full benefits." She stared at him. "You don't publicize this," he shook his head. "Not everything needs a camera." That one sentence sat with her. In a world where politicians curated every act of kindness for the spotlight, this man was building dignity quietly, without a hashtag or headline. And Jasmine realized something. Some leaders build their image. This one built lives. That evening, she was invited to dine with him privately. No gold trim. No servers in tuxedos. Just a small table. Grilled chicken. Rice. And beans. Simple. Human. But one thing stood out. An empty chair at the corner of the table, neatly placed. Untouched. Jasmine glanced at it. "Are we expecting someone else?" Traoré shook his head. "That's for my brother. Adama." She lowered her voice. "Where is he gone?" He said, "Taken in a raid when I was 17. I was supposed to be there, but I had left early to find water." He stared at the chair. He always sat there. Told me stories while we ate. I keep it for him. Not out of sadness, but memory. Jasmine didn't respond. She simply moved her chair closer until it sat beside the empty one. And together, they ate in silence. No speeches. No announcements. Because sometimes, the most powerful way to honor someone is to set a place at the table for those the world has forgotten. The next morning, Jasmine made a quiet request. Could I visit where you grew up? Traoré didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, thoughtful. Then he gave a single nod. A short drive later, they arrived on the edge of town. No motorcade. No press. Just 2 cars and a dirt path leading to a modest clay brick house with a rusted tin roof and faded blue door. This was home, he said. The door creaked open to a single small room. 2 beds. A broken fan. A chipped mirror hanging crooked on the wall. Jasmine stepped inside carefully. Like her presence might disturb something sacred. On the far wall was a photo of a smiling woman. It was old, sun-bleached, and framed in worn plastic. My mother, Traoré said, his voice softer than usual. Jasmine looked around. It was like time had frozen here. Faded curtains, old sandals tucked under one bed, a hand-drawn pencil sketch taped to the wall. You kept this place? She asked. He nodded. This is where I first learned hunger and hope. I come here to remember both. Jasmine walked to a small windowsill. There, barely catching the morning light, was a tiny metal bowl, dented, empty. What's this? She asked. He smiled faintly. Stepping closer. My mother's bowl. Every time she had 10 francs, she'd drop 1 coin into it. Jasmine turned to him. Puzzled. Why 1? She said. A country doesn't change by the millions. It starts with the smallest sacrifice. His words landed like a quiet sermon. She believed if you could give, even when you had almost nothing, that was the beginning of something bigger. Jasmine stared at the bowl again. It was empty, but somehow, it held everything. In that moment, the distance between nations, between politics and people, collapsed. This wasn't a house tour. It was a homecoming for both of them. Outside, they walked to a small patch of dirt, shaded by a neem tree. No cameras. No microphones. Just 2 people. A tree. And the wind. Jasmine sat beside him on the ground. Why do you carry all this pain so quietly? She asked. He took a breath. Because shouting doesn't bring the dead back. He looked down at his hands. When I was barely 20, I was captured during a rebel attack. Tied up. Kicked. Beaten. Jasmine's breath caught. But one of them recognized me. We'd gone to school together. I gave him my lunch once. When his mother was sick, he looked up. Eyes distant. He envied me. Told me to run. And did you? She asked. No. He said. I stayed. I begged for the lives of the others. But they didn't listen. His voice cracked. Just once. Jasmine wiped a tear. And now I try to lead like that boy did. Quietly. With mercy. She didn't say a word. Because sometimes, leadership isn't loud. It doesn't come with medals or applause. Sometimes, it comes from a bowl by the window and a boy who remembered a single act of kindness years later. In a moment, that changed everything. Later that day, Jasmine found herself standing in the president's office, waiting for him to return from a meeting. As she glanced around the room, her eyes landed on something unexpected, a tiny pair of worn-out children's shoes sitting neatly on a shelf behind his desk. Not displayed, just there. Curious, she asked when he returned. "Do you have a child?" Traoré walked over quietly, his fingers brushing the shoes with a tenderness that said more than words ever could. "No," he replied. "These belong to a boy named Idrissa." He sat down slowly, like his body remembered more than his mind wanted to say. "I met him at a displacement camp. He was 7. No parents, no shoes, just 2 plastic bags tied around his feet." Jasmine's heart tightened. "He saw me, ran up, and handed me these." Traoré said. He said, "You can walk farther than me, Mr. President." Jasmine didn't respond. She couldn't. 3 days later, he died of pneumonia. She turned away slightly, trying to compose herself. "I wanted to bury the shoes with him," he continued. "But his aunt asked me to keep them," she said. "He believed I was different, that I'd prove him right." His voice didn't tremble, but Jasmine's eyes filled. "I keep them here," he said, "to remind me every step I take is borrowed from someone who never got the chance." That evening, they visited a rural clinic on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. No security fanfare, no cameras, just a dusty road and a tin-roofed building surrounded by dry earth and silence. Inside, children lay on narrow beds, IV tubes taped to tiny arms, ceiling fans barely moving. But one bed was empty. Traoré stopped beside it. That was Thomas's bed. Jasmine looked over, sensing the story before he even spoke. He had tuberculosis. His mother walked 18 kilometers, carrying him on her back. But by the time they got here, the oxygen tank was broken. His voice lowered. "We called for a replacement. It came 2 hours too late." He placed a hand on the rusted bed frame. "We later fixed the tank, repainted the walls, brought in new supplies. But this bed, it stays." Jasmine looked at the dented mattress, the worn edges, the small water stain on the wall beside it. "Why keep it?" she asked quietly. "Because being president doesn't always mean you can save someone in time," he said. "Sometimes you're just too late." The weight of that truth crushed the room. "Leadership," he continued, "isn't only about fixing what's broken. It's about remembering who we lost while we waited." And in that moment, Jasmine saw it clearly. This wasn't a man holding power. This was a man holding pain and refusing to let the world forget the names that never made the news, the faces that never reached the headlines. Because real leadership doesn't just speak for the living, it carries the silence of the ones who are gone. That night, Jasmine couldn't sleep. She tossed, turned, thought about Idrissa's shoes, about Thomas's empty bed, about the little girl outside the gate, and the bowl by the window. The silence in this place said more than 1,000 campaign speeches. Around midnight, she heard quiet footsteps outside her door. She stepped into the hallway and saw Traoré standing there. No guards, no aides, just him, holding his phone, shoulders slumped, like a man carrying the sky. "Is everything okay?" she asked. He nodded, but barely. "I just got off the phone," he said, voice low. "A father from the north. His daughter was taken by militants last night." Jasmine froze. She was supposed to start school today. He added, "We'd made arrangements for her tuition. Books, everything. I met her last week." He rubbed his hand down his face. "I told him she'd be safe. I told him we were making progress. I asked him to trust me. And now, all I have are words." Jasmine stepped closer, gently placed her hand on his arm. "You carry so much alone." He didn't deny it. Every name, every face, every promise I couldn't keep. They don't go away when the cameras turn off. His voice cracked just slightly. "I will get her back," he said, "even if it's the last thing I do." In that dim hallway, Jasmine saw the part of leadership no one applauds, the part no one films, the weight that doesn't show up in headlines. It wasn't about failure. It was about the unbearable ache of not being fast enough to stop the next heartbreak. The next morning, they sat together for a farewell dinner. It was quiet. Grilled fish, plantains, beans. No guests, no speeches, just the two of them. And the silence that had grown between them, not the kind that's awkward, but the kind that understands. Jasmine was supposed to leave the next morning. Bags packed. Schedule cleared. But something about this goodbye didn't feel finished. As they stood to say their farewells, she hesitated, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. A full hug. The kind you give someone who's holding in too much. He didn't move at first. Then slowly, his hand rested on her shoulder. His eyes closed. "Just for a second. I didn't expect to feel this much," she whispered. "Neither did I," he replied. When they pulled apart, her eyes were misty. "Thank you," she said, "for being more than a title." He nodded. "And thank you for seeing past mine." That night, she didn't sleep either. She lay awake thinking of the girl with the cardboard sign, the soldier with a notebook, the mother who carried her son 18 kilometers, the prisoner who taught others to read, and one man standing quietly in the middle of it all. Not because he wanted power, but because he couldn't bear to let them be forgotten. Jasmine's final morning in Burkina Faso was quiet. As the car made its way to the airport, she turned to Traoré and asked, "Can we stop by that same neighborhood where the little girl stood with the sign?" He didn't hesitate. They drove down the same dusty street. And there she was, same spot, same scarf tied around her neck. But this time, her mother was standing beside her, eyes full of tears, wearing a clean apron. "She starts work today," Traoré said. "Laundry for the presidential residence." The woman stepped forward. No cameras, no speeches. She just hugged him tight. Wordless. "No one ever saw us," she whispered. "But you did." The little girl walked over to Jasmine and handed her something small, a paper flower, handmade, carefully folded from an old notebook page. "For you," she said, "to remember Burkina Faso." Jasmine knelt down, smiling through tears. "You won't forget," she whispered. "I promise." As they drove off, Jasmine looked back at the girl waving, her mother's hand resting on her shoulder. And that's when Traoré said something Jasmine would never forget. Sometimes helping one mother is more powerful than passing 100 laws. Later, on the plane home, Jasmine reviewed the raw interview footage. She paused at one unscripted moment, just one offhand question she'd asked at the very end. When the cameras were about to shut off, "Mr. President," she'd said, "what's something you wish the world knew about you?" Traoré had paused, then said quietly, I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm just trying to be the kind of man my mother would have been proud of. That was it. One sentence. But it carried the weight of a lifetime. In post-production, the network considered cutting that part. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't political. But Jasmine insisted run it. Unedited. 4 days after it aired. The internet exploded. Millions watched. Millions cried. News anchors called it the most human moment in modern leadership. Young men posted videos saying, "This changed how I see what strength really is." Teachers showed it in classrooms. Churches quoted it in sermons. And Jasmine, she stood silently in the back of a studio, hands shaking, as the clip played on screen, because she knew this wasn't just a broadcast. This was truth. 3 days later, she called him. The videos crossed 50 million views. She said, "You've become a symbol." His voice came through the line, soft as ever. "I didn't want to be a symbol." He replied, "I just wanted to serve my people. With love." He paused. "Just promise me something. Anything." She said, "Don't let the world make this story about me. Let them remember the little girl. The soldier. The boy with no shoes. The man in prison. That's who this was really for." Jasmine wiped her eyes. "Thank you, Ibrahim." For what he asked? For proving that quiet strength is the loudest voice of all. That night, she posted a photo of the paper flower next to her microphone and wrote, "In a world of noise," one man whispered, and the world finally listened.